She died because she wouldn't succumb to their rules or their instruction. She wanted out. There's more than 2 people that know that she wanted out, and she refused to give up. And they've just let her die.
I think it's horrible. It's just awful that anybody's allowed, how they can sit and watch a human being, die like that.
Lisa McPherson was driving through the quiet streets of Clearwater, Florida, when her car drifted off course, colliding softly with another vehicle. It was a minor accident, no shattered glass, no sirens wailing, a simple, forgettable fender bender. But as Lisa stepped out of her car, something far more alarming began to unfold. In front of confused onlookers, she calmly started removing her clothes right there on the road. It wasn't panic. It wasn't shock. It was something else, something deeply troubling. Paramedics were quick to respond, and while her body showed no signs of injury, it became clear that her mind was in turmoil. Lisa was taken to the hospital for a psychiatric evaluation, a crucial moment where her mental state could have been addressed. But against the advice of doctors, Lisa checked herself out. Rather than seeking help, she returned to the place she believed could offer her salvation, the Church of Scientology. Behind the closed doors of their spiritual headquarters, what should have been recovery spiraled into a nightmare. For the next 17 days, Lisa was kept in isolation, neglected, and denied the care that might have saved her. Her final days were filled with suffering. But what exactly happened in those 17 days? Could the events that followed have been prevented? And how did a simple hospital visit turn into a tragic ordeal? Now, before we continue, I'd like to ask you a small favor. Our channel is still new, and every single subscriber helps us grow. Your support motivates us to produce even more in-depth, high-quality content like this. So if you're enjoying these deep dives into medical mishaps and want to stay updated on future videos, please consider subscribing. It's a simple action that would mean the world to us and ensures you never miss out on any new cases. Now, without further ado, let's get back to the case. Lisa McPherson was born on February 10, 1959, in Dallas, Texas. Growing up in a typical American household, her early years remained somewhat of a mystery, with little documentation about her childhood or family life. However, one thing was clear: McPherson was a bright, ambitious, and determined individual from a young age, traits that would carry her through a series of pivotal choices later in life. But as she grew older, these very qualities would lead her into a world that would forever change the course of her life: Scientology. For many young adults in the 1980s, the pursuit of personal growth and spiritual fulfillment was a deeply attractive prospect. And for Lisa, the Church of Scientology, founded by science fiction writer L. Ron Hubbard, appeared to offer exactly that. Scientology promised not just personal betterment, but spiritual salvation, wrapped in the allure of a higher purpose. Lisa was captivated. It was the early 1980s when she took her first steps into the world of Scientology, a move that would soon consume her life in ways she could never have anticipated. As she began immersing herself in Scientology practices, the lines between her personal and professional life started to blur. Working as a marketing professional at AMC Publishing, a company with strong ties to Scientology, her career seemed to flourish as her involvement in the church deepened. It was no longer just a religious practice. It was her lifestyle, her community, and her purpose. Despite her growing devotion to Scientology, Lisa was described by those who knew her as lively, ambitious, and full of life. She had an infectious energy, and her peers admired her drive. Yet, in stark contrast, her personal life was veiled in privacy, a mystery even to some of her closest friends. Perhaps this was a reflection of her growing entanglement with Scientology, an organization known for its secretive practices and rigid control over its members' lives. Lisa found in Scientology what she believed was the answer to her spiritual and mental struggles. She began climbing the church's rigorous spiritual hierarchy, undergoing intense auditing sessions, an integral part of the religion. These sessions, which involved confronting past traumas, promised to clear her mind of emotional and psychological burdens. But were they really working? Or was Lisa merely slipping further into a state of mental unrest, masked by the promise of clarity? By September 1995, after years of dedication, Lisa reached a significant milestone within the church. She was declared clear. To many within Scientology, this was the ultimate achievement, a status that signified she had successfully removed all engrams, negative experiences, from her mind. It should have been a moment of triumph. For Lisa, it seemed like the turning point in her life she had been seeking. However, despite the outward appearance of mental clarity and spiritual success, cracks in Lisa's psychological well-being began to show. Instead of the promised serenity and peace, her behavior grew erratic. Those around her started noticing the shift. Was the process truly working, or had she pushed herself too far? As 1995 drew to a close, Lisa's mental state began to unravel. Despite her clear status, her erratic behavior escalated. She exhibited stress, unpredictability, and clear signs of distress, symptoms that contradicted the very teachings that were supposed to bring her peace. The serenity that Scientology had promised seemed more elusive than ever. But instead of addressing these growing issues with conventional psychiatric care, which the church vehemently opposes, Lisa turned deeper into the very practices that were supposed to help her. Was it too late for Lisa to find real help? It was November 18, 1995, a day that would become a critical turning point in Lisa McPherson's life, one that would set the wheels of her tragic fate in motion. Lisa was driving through Clearwater, Florida, home to the Church of Scientology's spiritual headquarters, the Flag Land Base. What started as a seemingly ordinary day took a sharp and unexpected turn when she was involved in a minor car accident. No one was physically hurt, and the crash itself was not particularly severe. However, the events that unfolded immediately afterward signaled that something far more troubling was happening beneath the surface. After the accident, Lisa's behavior became alarming and erratic. Witnesses, who had seen her moments after the crash, were shocked as she stepped out of her car and suddenly began stripping off her clothes in the middle of the road. What could drive someone to do such a thing? Was this simply a moment of panic or confusion? Or was it a plea for help in a language only Lisa could understand? The fact that she was physically unharmed, yet mentally unraveling in front of everyone's eyes, was a red flag that her mental state had deteriorated much further than anyone had realized. First responders were called to the scene, and paramedics arrived to assess the situation. They found Lisa physically uninjured, yet clearly something was wrong. She wasn't in need of medical attention for her body, but her mind was screaming for help. Stripping down in public, especially under such circumstances, pointed to a deep psychological distress, one that no one had seen coming. It was a visual cry for help that anyone could understand, yet it was also one that would be tragically misunderstood. Initially, paramedics made the decision to leave Lisa at the scene, believing she didn't require immediate medical treatment. But as her behavior escalated, they realized that this wasn't just about physical injury. Her mental state was in dire need of attention. Eventually, they made the call to transport her to a nearby hospital for a psychiatric evaluation, a decision that could have potentially saved her life if followed through. When Lisa arrived at the hospital, medical professionals recognized the severity of her mental state. They strongly recommended that she remain for psychiatric observation, but what happens next would only add another tragic layer to this unfolding story. Despite the clear signs that she was experiencing a mental breakdown, Lisa refused the care offered to her. Against medical advice, she made the decision to check herself out of the hospital. Why did Lisa refuse the very care that could have helped her? Was it fear? Was it the ingrained belief from her years within Scientology, which rejected traditional psychiatric interventions? we may never know what truly went through her mind during that critical moment. The hospital staff had done what they could, but Lisa's refusal to stay under psychiatric observation marked a missed lifeline, one of many. As she walked out of that hospital, the opportunity to address her growing mental distress was lost. Tragically, the path Lisa chose, or was compelled to choose, led her straight back into the hands of Scientology, the very organization that had promised her mental and spiritual clarity. But what awaited her there was far from the healing she desperately needed. After Lisa McPherson checked herself out of the hospital, what should have been a moment for professional intervention instead became a terrifying step into one of Scientology's most secretive and controversial practices, the introspection rundown. Upon her return to the Flagland base, Scientology's spiritual headquarters in Clearwater, Florida, the church placed Lisa into this extreme process, designed for members they believed were suffering from psychotic breaks. For Lisa, this so-called treatment would prove fatal. What exactly is the introspection rundown? It's a process that Scientologists claim helps individuals confront and overcome their inner turmoil. But instead of receiving the proper care that could have saved her life, Lisa was isolated from the world. Communication was strictly prohibited, even with those who were supposed to be caring for her. The rationale behind this practice is that removing external stimuli allows the individual to focus inward, confronting their mental demons. In reality, however, this isolation often stripped away the essential human connections and medical care that a person in crisis desperately needs. Now, imagine being trapped, cut off from the world, with no way to ask for help. The very people tasked with helping Lisa were bound by a rigid doctrine that placed spiritual methods above medical expertise. What happens when belief systems override basic human compassion? This wasn't Lisa's first experience with the introspection rundown. Earlier in 1995, she had undergone the same process, but at that time, she had emerged on the other side with the status of clear, a major milestone in Scientology that was supposed to mark mental clarity and freedom from emotional burdens. Yet just months later, after her car accident and erratic behavior, the decision was made to place her into the rundown once again. But this time, Lisa would not come out alive. Over the course of the next 17 days, Lisa McPherson was kept under 24-hour watch at the Flagland base. 17 days of isolation, where her every move, every change in behavior, was meticulously recorded by staff members. But despite the constant monitoring, her condition rapidly deteriorated. What was happening inside that room? And more importantly, was anyone really paying attention to her growing distress? For 17 days, Lisa McPherson was watched, yet somehow no one saw what was happening to her. How can someone be so closely monitored and yet still be ignored? As her condition worsened, those tasked with her care either failed to act or were bound by a belief system that led them to neglect her in ways that would soon prove fatal. Within just 2 weeks, Lisa's physical state had deteriorated drastically. Reports show that she became severely dehydrated and emaciated. Her body, once vibrant and full of life, was now covered in skin lesions. Perhaps the most shocking revelation, she was found with what appeared to be cockroach bites on her skin. How had it come to this? How had a vibrant woman who was simply seeking help been reduced to this condition under the watchful eyes of the church staff? And yet, despite the clear signs of her physical decline, no real medical intervention was provided. Instead, Scientology staff turned to Dr. David Minkoff, a fellow Scientologist and licensed physician. But Minkoff never personally examined Lisa. His role in her care was shockingly distant. He prescribed medications such as Valium and chloral hydrate, sedatives intended to help her sleep and manage agitation, based solely on reports from other Scientologists. He never saw the severity of her condition with his own eyes, trusting verbal accounts rather than seeking a first-hand understanding of what was happening. As Lisa's health worsened, reports surfaced that staff members overseeing her care noticed troubling physical symptoms, symptoms that screamed for medical attention. A measles-like rash appeared on her face, and her breathing became labored. Some staff members even suggested antibiotics might be necessary, but Dr. Minkoff refused to prescribe them without seeing Lisa in person. This critical decision, this refusal to act, was another missed opportunity, a moment where real medical care could have made all the difference. And yet, despite all these red flags, Lisa remained in isolation, subjected to the procedures of the introspection rundown. Proper feeding, hydration, and medical checks were neglected or outright ignored. With each passing day, her condition grew more dire, and by the time the decision was made to take her to a hospital, it was already too late. Was Lisa's fate sealed by the very belief system she trusted to heal her? With each passing day of isolation, her body and mind slipped further away, and no one intervened in time. But perhaps the most chilling part of this story is that there were many chances to save her, and each one was tragically missed. On the 17th day of her isolation, Lisa's condition had reached a critical point. Her breathing became labored, and she eventually became unresponsive. It was only then, as her life hung in the balance, that the decision was made to rush her to a hospital. But why was this decision delayed for so long? Even more troubling is the fact that Scientology staff chose to bypass 4 closer trauma centers in Clearwater, and instead drove Lisa 45 minutes away to a hospital where Dr. Minkoff was on staff. By the time they arrived, Lisa had no pulse. Despite desperate attempts at CPR, after 20 minutes of effort, Lisa McPherson was pronounced dead on December 5, 1995. 4 trauma centers were just minutes away, yet Lisa McPherson was taken on a 45-minute journey to a hospital where it was already too late. Was this a final attempt to control her fate, or was it sheer negligence? The official cause of Lisa McPherson's death was ruled as a pulmonary embolism, a blood clot that had traveled to her lungs. But what exactly is a pulmonary embolism, and how did it contribute to Lisa's death? A pulmonary embolism occurs when a blood clot, usually formed in the deep veins of the legs, breaks free and travels to the lungs. Once it reaches the lungs, the clot can lodge itself in one of the pulmonary arteries, blocking blood flow. This blockage prevents oxygen from properly reaching the lungs and can severely damage the heart. In Lisa's case, the embolism had blocked a major artery in her left lung, cutting off vital blood flow and leading to her death. One of the key factors that often contributes to the formation of these dangerous clots is immobility. When someone is bedridden or inactive for an extended period, blood circulation slows down, which can cause clots to form. Given that Lisa had been isolated and largely immobilized during her 17-day stint at the Flag Land Base, her immobility likely played a critical role in the formation of this clot. The autopsy didn't just reveal the pulmonary embolism, it painted a broader, more disturbing picture of Lisa McPherson's physical condition during her final days. Medical examiners found that she had suffered from severe dehydration, malnutrition, and multiple bruises and lesions on her arms, legs, and feet. Even more disturbing were the cockroach bites that covered parts of her body, suggesting she had been left in unsanitary conditions without proper care. Her weakened physical state, resulting from dehydration and lack of nourishment, compounded the effects of the embolism. The prolonged isolation, lack of proper hydration, and neglect of her basic medical needs created the perfect storm that ultimately led to her tragic death. Lisa's deterioration wasn't just the result of a single medical event. It was the product of 17 days of suffering, with no intervention to stop her rapid decline. In the wake of Lisa's death, her family filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the Church of Scientology, alleging that their negligence during her 17-day isolation directly led to her death. The central claim was that the church had failed in its duty of care, relying on spiritual practices rather than seeking professional medical treatment that could have saved Lisa's life. As part of the legal proceedings, the court obtained detailed logs that had been meticulously kept by Scientology staff during Lisa's time in the introspection rundown. These logs documented her refusal to eat, her visible physical decline, and her growing disorientation. But here's the chilling detail. Despite these alarming signs, no one intervened with appropriate medical treatment. The logs highlighted a glaring lack of action on the part of the staff who had been watching her deteriorate day after day. Initially, Dr. Joan Wood, the medical examiner who conducted Lisa's autopsy, concluded that her death was due to complications from bed rest and severe dehydration. The manner of death was classified as undetermined, meaning it wasn't clear whether it was natural, accidental, or due to foul play. This ruling left the door open for speculation about whether Lisa's death had been caused by neglect or mistreatment during her time in Scientology's care. The Church of Scientology immediately contested these findings, disputing any claims that Lisa's death was linked to her treatment at the Flagland base. The church assembled a high-powered team of forensic experts, including Dr. Michael Baden and Dr. Cyril Wecht, two well-known pathologists. These experts argued that Lisa's death had been caused by a blood clot that formed after her minor car accident 17 days earlier, and they claimed this embolism was an unpredictable medical event, not related to her isolation or care at the Flagland base. Facing intense legal pressure from the Church of Scientology, Dr. Wood eventually revised her findings in 2000. She changed Lisa's cause of death from undetermined to accident, stating that new scientific evidence provided by the church's experts had influenced her decision. This revision had serious legal implications, as it led the state of Florida to drop criminal charges against the Church of Scientology, which had initially included charges of abuse or neglect of a disabled adult and practicing medicine without a license. Critics of the revised autopsy argued that Lisa's prolonged immobility, dehydration, and lack of medical care were still central to her death. Even if the blood clot had initially formed after the car accident, her deteriorating condition during the 17 days of isolation undoubtedly worsened her chances of survival. The revision may have cleared the church of criminal liability, but it did little to quell public outrage or ease the grief of Lisa's family. Was Lisa's death truly an accident, or was it the result of a dangerous belief system that prioritizes spiritual healing over medical intervention? Despite the revision, critics argued that McPherson's dehydration, malnutrition, and lack of medical care during her 17-day isolation were still central to her death. The revised findings did little to quell public outcry, and many saw it as a capitulation to the church's legal and financial power. The civil case brought by McPherson's family pressed on even after the criminal charges were dropped. Central to the case were logs kept by Scientology staff, which provided a chilling account of McPherson's gradual physical and mental decline while under their care. These logs revealed her refusal to eat, severe dehydration, and erratic behavior during her isolation. In 2004, after nearly a decade of legal battles, the wrongful death lawsuit was settled out of court for an undisclosed sum. As part of the settlement, the Church of Scientology did not admit to any wrongdoing, continuing to maintain their position that McPherson's death was an unfortunate but unavoidable accident. The settlement brought legal closure to the case but did little to heal the deep scars it had left on public perception of the church. Protests and media coverage surrounding the case highlighted the potential dangers of Scientology's introspection rundown and its opposition to psychiatric care, raising lasting questions about how the church handles mental health crises. In response to the case, the Church of Scientology implemented what has become known as the Lisa McPherson Clause, a waiver that members of the church must sign, acknowledging that Scientology is not a medical institution. This clause essentially protects the church from future lawsuits by establishing that members are responsible for their own health decisions and are not relying on Scientology for medical care. Lisa McPherson's tragic death remains one of the most controversial and publicized incidents involving the Church of Scientology. The case cast a glaring light on the Church's rejection of psychiatric treatment, its handling of members in psychological distress, and the consequences of relying solely on spiritual methods like the introspection rundown. For many, this case serves as a stark reminder of the risks of ignoring conventional medical advice in favor of religious or spiritual practices, especially in situations involving mental health. What do you think? Could Lisa McPherson's death have been prevented if she had received proper medical and psychiatric care? Do religious organizations like the Church of Scientology bear responsibility when their practices potentially endanger lives? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this documentary insightful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more in-depth investigations